The Long Shadow of the Past. Part 1. The Beginning, 1999. The summer heat in Riverdale, Texas was merciless. Even at dusk, the air hung thick and heavy, clinging to 17-year-old Alex Carter's skin as he walked home from the public library, his backpack weighed down with architecture books. Main Street was quiet, most of the shops already closed for the day, their windows dark against the fading light. Alex was not like the other boys his age. While they spent their evenings chasing girls or throwing footballs, he buried himself in blueprints and design theories. His bedroom walls were covered with intricate sketches of buildings, some real, some imagined, each one meticulously detailed with his steady hand. Architecture wasn't just a casual interest. It was his escape, his future, his salvation from this small town. One day, he would tell his mother Elizabeth during their modest dinners, "I'll design something so beautiful people will remember my name." Elizabeth would smile, the corners of her eyes crinkling with pride despite the exhaustion etched into her face. Since losing her husband to cancer 3 years ago, she'd been working double shifts at Riverdale General Hospital to keep them afloat. Their small bungalow on Maple Avenue was nothing fancy, but it was clean, warm, and filled with the kind of love that money couldn't buy. That evening, Alex took a shortcut through the abandoned Carson property, an unfinished housing development that had been sitting half-constructed since the developer went bankrupt 2 years earlier. Concrete foundations, skeletal wooden frames, and rusting rebar created an eerie landscape in the twilight. Alex often came here to sketch, finding beauty in the incomplete structures where others saw only failure. He was crossing through what would have been the community center when he heard them, the distinctive rumble of Logan Reeves' Mustang GT, followed by raucous laughter. Logan was Riverdale royalty, the only son of Richard Reeves, who owned half the businesses in town and had the other half in his pocket. Logan was handsome, athletic, and accustomed to getting exactly what he wanted, exactly when he wanted it. Alex quickly ducked behind a concrete pillar, but it was too late. Headlights swept across the property, illuminating his hiding spot. "Well, look what we found." Logan's voice carried across the empty lot as he stepped out of the car, followed by his usual entourage, Brad Miller and Troy Daniels, fellow members of Riverdale High's championship football team. "If it isn't the little architect." Alex clutched his backpack tighter. "I'm just passing through, Logan. I don't want any trouble." Logan's smile was cold. "That's funny, because trouble seems to want you." He sauntered closer, the setting sun glinting off his Letterman jacket. "What's in the bag, Carter?" "Your little drawings." "Leave me alone," Alex said, trying to edge away, but Brad and Troy had already moved to flank him. "You know, my dad's thinking about rebuilding this place," Logan continued, gesturing broadly at the abandoned construction site. "Maybe you should show me your designs. I could put in a good word." When Alex didn't respond, Logan's expression hardened. "I'm talking to you, freak." What happened next would play on repeat in Alex's nightmares for years to come. A shove. A punch. His backpack torn from his shoulders. His precious sketches scattered across the dirt. When Alex fought back, landing one solid hit to Logan's perfectly straight nose, the real beating began. They took turns, their laughter echoing off the concrete as Alex's world dissolved into pain. When they finally tired of their sport, Logan leaned down, his face inches from Alex's bloodied one. "This is what happens to nobodies like you who forget their place," he whispered, then spat on the ground beside Alex's head. "Consider it a life lesson." They left him there, broken and barely conscious among the ruins of what might have been, just as night descended fully over Riverdale. Elizabeth found him the next morning after a frantic night of searching. The doctors later told them he was lucky to be alive. For broken ribs, a shattered wrist, a severe concussion, and damage to the nerves in his drawing hand that would never fully heal. The trial was a farce. Richard Reeves' influence stretched into every corner of Riverdale, including the courthouse. Witnesses suddenly couldn't remember what they'd seen. Evidence disappeared. The judge, who had recently received a generous donation for his re-election campaign from Reeves Enterprises, deemed Logan's actions youthful indiscretion. In the end, Logan paid a small fine and was sentenced to 20 hours of community service, which his father's secretary likely completed for him. 2 months later, while Alex was still learning to use his right hand for basic tasks, Logan left for Princeton, his violent indiscretion, nothing more than a minor hiccup in his golden trajectory. On the day Logan departed, Alex sat at his bedroom window, watching the autumn leaves scatter across their small front yard. His once precise sketches now resembled a child's scribbles, his dreams of becoming an architect as broken as the bones that had finally healed. But something else had crystallized within him, something cold and patient and unyielding. "I will come back for you," he whispered to the empty air. "It might take 25 years, but I swear, Logan Reeves, I will make you remember my name." The words weren't shouted in anger. They were a promise, made with the same careful precision he had once applied to his architectural drawings. And like those drawings, he would make sure every detail was perfect. Part 2. The Return, 2024. The sleek black Bentley glided through downtown Austin, its tinted windows reflecting the neon lights of the city's vibrant nightlife district. Inside, Logan Reeves scrolled through his phone, barely glancing at the fourth-quarter projections his CFO had sent over. At 42, Logan had built what many considered a hospitality empire, 14 high-end restaurants across Texas, each one more exclusive than the last. His latest establishment, Sovereign, had just received its second Michelin star, a fact his PR team had leveraged into profiles in Bon Appetit and Forbes. "We're here, Mr. Reeves," his driver announced, pulling up to the curb outside Sovereign. Logan stepped out, straightening his bespoke Tom Ford suit. At 6'2" with salt and pepper hair that only enhanced his features, he still turned heads. Time had been good to Logan Reeves, at least on the outside. "Evening, Mr. Reeves." The maitre d' greeted him with practiced deference. "Your usual table is ready." Logan nodded without really seeing the man. He'd long ago stopped noticing the people who served him. They were background characters in the story of his success. He made his way through the restaurant, accepting the nods and smiles of recognition from Austin's elite, who considered a reservation at Sovereign a status symbol. His usual table was in a private alcove overlooking Lady Bird Lake, where he typically entertained potential investors or enjoyed quiet meals alone. Tonight, however, someone was already seated there. A man in a charcoal suit whose back was turned to him. "There seems to be a mistake," Logan said coldly to the maitre d' who had followed him. Before the flustered employee could respond, the stranger turned around. He was about Logan's age, with steel-gray eyes and the kind of face that revealed little. Despite an almost imperceptible stiffness to his right side, he carried himself with quiet confidence. "No mistake, Mr. Reeves," the man said, his voice carrying the faintest hint of a smile though his expression remained neutral. "I took the liberty of arranging this meeting. Please, join me." Something about the man triggered a distant memory, but Logan couldn't place it. After a moment's hesitation, curiosity won out, and he slid into the chair across from the stranger. "You have me at a disadvantage," Logan said, signaling for a waiter. "Michael Harmon," the man replied, offering his hand. Even his handshake felt measured, deliberate. "I represent Meridian Holdings. We've been watching your expansion with interest." Logan ordered his usual scotch, then turned his attention back to his mysterious guest. "Meridian Holdings? Can't say I'm familiar." "We prefer to operate quietly," Harmon replied, "but we're in position to offer you something unique." Over the next hour, as they shared an expensive bottle of wine, Harmon outlined a proposal that made even Logan's pulse quicken. The opportunity to open a flagship restaurant in the historic Caldwell Building in downtown Riverdale, a forgotten architectural gem that was being renovated after decades of neglect. "Riverdale," Logan scoffed, though something flickered in his eyes. "I left that backwater town for a reason. Sometimes returning to our roots with newfound success is the sweetest victory," Harmon observed mildly. "Besides, the Caldwell Building isn't just any property. It's a masterpiece of early Texas modernism, and our renovations have preserved every inch of its character, while updating the infrastructure. Logan swirled his scotch, considering. He hadn't set foot in Riverdale since leaving for Princeton 25 years ago. His father had died a decade back, leaving him a substantial inheritance that had funded his first restaurant. The town held no fond memories, yet the idea of returning triumphant, as the successful magnate he'd become, held an undeniable appeal to his ego. The terms would have to be exceptional, he said finally. Harmon smiled, sliding a slim folder across the table. We thought you might say that. No upfront capital required from you. We provide the space, fully built out to your specifications. You provide your brand, your menu, your expertise. We split the profits 60/40ths in your favor. Logan's eyebrows shot up. That's unusually generous. Meridian has diverse interests. This property is more about prestige than immediate profit for us, Harmon explained. We want the best, and your restaurants represent that. By the time dessert arrived, Logan had tentatively agreed to visit the property the following weekend. As they parted ways outside the restaurant, Harmon handed Logan his card. Simple white cardstock with only a name and number. One last thing, Harmon said. The project has a specific timeline. Construction must be completed by July 15th, with the grand opening exactly 1 month later, on August 15th. Any particular reason? Logan asked. Harmon's smile didn't quite reach his eyes. Let's just say the date has significance for my employer. Asterisk, asterisk, asterisk. What Logan Reeves didn't know, couldn't have known, was that Michael Harmon returned to a modest hotel room that night, removed the contact lenses that altered his eye color, and peeled away the subtle prosthetics that had changed the shape of his jaw and cheekbones. As he looked in the mirror, Alex Carter stared back at him. The same gray eyes that had once burned with dreams of architectural greatness, now cold with purpose. The Caldwell Building wasn't just any historic property. It had been designed by William Caldwell, the very architect whose biography had been in Alex's backpack the night Logan and his friends had beaten him. The night everything changed. For 25 years, Alex had been meticulously constructing his revenge with the same attention to detail he would have given to designing a skyscraper. After months of physical therapy had failed to restore the fine motor control in his right hand, he had taught himself to draw with his left, though he never regained the talent that had once defined him. Instead, he channeled his creativity into a new form of architecture, building businesses rather than buildings. Starting as a construction worker despite his physical limitations, he had saved every penny, taken night classes in business and finance, and slowly worked his way up. 10 years in, he founded a small construction firm specializing in historical renovations. 15 years after that night in Riverdale, his company had grown successful enough to begin acquiring properties of its own. All the while, he had kept tabs on Logan Reeves, watching from afar as the man who had destroyed his dreams built an empire on his family's wealth and connections. Logan's restaurants were indeed excellent. Alex had dined anonymously at each one, studying his enemy's business model, learning his patterns, his preferences, his weaknesses. 3 years ago, when the Caldwell Building in Riverdale came up for auction, Alex had purchased it through one of his shell companies, pouring millions into its restoration. It was to be the stage for his final act, a performance 25 years in the making. Meridian Holdings was fiction, just one of several corporate entities Alex had established over the years, each one carefully insulated from his true identity. The company's executives, including the charming and persuasive Michael Harmon, were all actors hired for specific roles, each knowing only their small part in a much larger production. Over the next 6 months, Logan made frequent trips to Riverdale, watching with growing excitement as the restaurant took shape within the beautifully restored Caldwell Building. Each visit reinforced his conviction that this would be his masterpiece, the crown jewel of his restaurant empire. The space was breathtaking, soaring ceilings with original crown molding, walls of windows overlooking the town square, and custom fixtures that perfectly balanced modern luxury with historical character. The kitchen was state-of-the-art, designed to his exact specifications. Even the basement wine cellar, with its climate-controlled racks and tasting room, exceeded his expectations. Logan had decided to call the restaurant Legacy, a name that satisfied his ego while nodding to the building's historical significance. He hired a celebrity chef from Dallas, recruited the best sommelier in Austin, and began an aggressive marketing campaign targeting wealthy diners from across the state. The town of Riverdale itself had changed dramatically since Logan's youth. Once a sleepy backwater, it had been transformed by its proximity to Austin's tech boom. New money had flowed in, renovating the historic downtown and bringing an influx of affluent residents looking for small-town charm with big-city amenities. Few remembered the Reeves family's former influence, and fewer still recognized Logan as the golden boy who had left under a cloud of whispers 25 years earlier. As opening day approached, Logan found himself unexpectedly drawn to the project in a way his other restaurants had never captured him. Perhaps it was the subtle satisfaction of returning to his hometown as a conqueror, or the unusual terms of his agreement with Meridian Holdings that removed much of the financial risk. Whatever the reason, he became increasingly hands-on, making almost weekly trips to Riverdale to oversee every detail. Just 2 weeks before the grand opening, Logan arrived for a final walkthrough to find Michael Harmon waiting for him in the nearly completed dining room. "You've outdone yourself," Harmon commented, gesturing to the space around them. "It's magnificent." Logan allowed himself a small smile of satisfaction. The space certainly helped. "Your renovation team did exceptional work." "We aim to please," Harmon replied. "Actually, that's why I'm here. My employer would like to make one small addition to our agreement." Logan's expression hardened slightly. "The contracts are signed, Harmon." "Nothing that changes the terms," Harmon assured him. "Just a small request regarding the opening night. My employer would like to reserve half the dining room for a private party. Colleagues and investors who've been instrumental in the Caldwell restoration." "Opening night is already fully booked," Logan objected. "I have state senators, tech CEOs, all of whom will be accommodated," Harmon interjected smoothly. "We're simply asking that the east section be reserved for our guests. Think of it as a chance to impress potential investors for your future expansions." After some negotiation, Logan reluctantly agreed, consoling himself with the thought that networking with Meridian's mysterious backers might indeed prove valuable. Asterisk, asterisk, asterisk. The week before opening night, everything began to unravel. Subtly at first, then with increasing momentum. It started with the celebrity chef, who called Logan in a panic, claiming he'd received a better offer from a competitor in Houston. No amount of money could convince him to stay. 3 days later, the sommelier followed suit, leaving for a position at a vineyard in California. Then suppliers began calling. The custom plates from Italy were delayed indefinitely. The specialty ingredients Logan had sourced for signature dishes were suddenly unavailable. The rare wines he'd acquired for the cellar were mysteriously rerouted to another buyer. Logan arrived in Riverdale 2 days before the opening to find the restaurant in chaos. The replacement chef he'd hastily hired was adequate but lacked the star power he'd been counting on. Half the staff he'd trained had inexplicably quit, citing personal reasons. Even Michael Harmon had become increasingly difficult to reach, responding to Logan's frantic calls with brief texts assuring him that everything would proceed as planned. The night before the grand opening, Logan stayed late at the restaurant, trying to salvage what he could of his vision. As he sat alone at the bar, nursing a glass of whiskey, he heard the soft click of the front door opening. Turning, he expected to see his manager or perhaps Harmon with more bad news. Instead, he found himself face to face with a ghost. The man who entered moved with a slight limp, his right hand resting stiffly at his side. But it was his eyes that Logan recognized, gray and penetrating, holding a quarter-century of cold purpose. "Hello, Logan," said Alex Carter. "It's been a while." Logan's glass slipped from his fingers, shattering on the polished floor. For the first time in 25 years, he was speechless. Part 3. "Alex?" Logan whispered, the name emerging from some long-buried recess of memory. Alex Carter. The restaurant seemed to shrink around them, the elegant space with its soaring ceilings and designer lighting suddenly claustrophobic. Logan's mind raced, struggling to reconcile the broken boy he'd left behind with the composed man who stood before him now. "You remember," Alex said, his voice even. "I'm flattered." Logan recovered quickly, decades of business negotiations having taught him to mask vulnerability. He straightened, adjusting his cuffs with practiced nonchalance. "Of course I remember. Riverdale High, right? You were an artist or something?" The deliberate vagueness was calculated, an attempt to minimize their shared history. A shadow of a smile crossed Alex's face. "Not quite. I was going to be an architect, before 3 football players decided to rearrange my hand." He held up his right hand, flexing it stiffly. "Before a small-town trial made a mockery of justice." Logan's eyes flickered to the hand, then away. "Look, whatever happened back then, we were kids. I'm sure it seemed worse than it was." "Seemed," Alex echoed, walking slowly into the restaurant, his gaze sweeping over the meticulously designed space. "For broken ribs, a shattered wrist, nerve damage that 3 surgeries couldn't fix. And you paid a fine equivalent to what you now spend on a bottle of wine." Logan swallowed hard, watching as Alex moved through the dining room with the confidence of an owner rather than a visitor. "What do you want, Alex? Money? An apology? It's been 25 years. What I want," Alex replied, running his fingers along the edge of a perfectly set table, "is for you to understand exactly what's happening. You see, there is no Meridian Holdings. There is no Michael Harmon. There are no wealthy investors coming to your grand opening tomorrow." He turned to face Logan fully. "There's only me. There has only ever been me." Logan stared at him, disbelief giving way to dawning horror. "You're behind all this? The building, the deal?" "Every inch of it," Alex confirmed. "I've owned the Caldwell building for 3 years. I've spent millions restoring it to the exact specifications of William Caldwell's original vision. The same architect whose biography was in my backpack the night you and your friends decided to have some fun." Logan's mind raced, calculating losses, possibilities, escape routes. "Why go through all this? Why not just confront me directly?" "Because that wouldn't be enough," Alex said simply. "You didn't just break my body, Logan. You stole my future. So I decided to create a new one. A future where you would pour your hopes, your reputation, and your ego into a project destined to destroy you." Logan forced a laugh, though it sounded hollow even to his own ears. "Destroy me? With what? A restaurant that doesn't open. I've had setbacks before. I'll recover." "Oh, the restaurant will open tomorrow," Alex assured him. "The grand unveiling of Legacy will proceed exactly as planned. Only it won't be called Legacy. As of this morning, the paperwork was filed changing the name to Shadow. A small adjustment, but one I find more fitting." "You can't do that," Logan protested. The contracts you signed give Meridian Holdings, which is to say me, final approval on all naming and branding decisions," Alex interrupted. "Your lawyers really should read the fine print more carefully." Logan's composure finally cracked. "This is insane. You've spent 25 years plotting some elaborate revenge over a teenage fight." "Not a fight," Alex corrected him quietly. "An assault. And not just any revenge. Justice. Delivered with the same careful planning your father used to ensure you never faced consequences." He checked his watch. "Speaking of time, you should get some rest. Tomorrow will be quite an event." With that, Alex turned and walked toward the door, his slight limp a constant reminder of their shared past. At the threshold, he paused. "One more thing, don't bother trying to cancel. The invitations were sent weeks ago, and Austin's finest are expecting a spectacle." His smile was cold. "I promise they won't be disappointed. Asterisk, asterisk, asterisk." Logan barely slept. By dawn, he was on the phone with his lawyers, who confirmed what he already feared. The contracts he'd signed were airtight. Meridian Holdings, or rather, the complex web of shell companies Alex had created, owned the building and had legally leased the space to Logan's restaurant group under terms that gave them surprising control over certain aspects of the operation. His next call was to his PR team, who advised him to proceed with the opening while they assessed the damage control options. Canceling would only trigger the penalty clauses in the contract and create a public relations nightmare that would affect all his restaurants. By early afternoon, Logan arrived at the restaurant to find preparations for the evening in full swing. Staff he didn't recognize moved efficiently through the space, arranging flowers, polishing glasses, and setting up a sophisticated audiovisual system he hadn't authorized. "What is all this?" he demanded of the new manager, a poised woman who introduced herself as Vanessa. "Mr. Carter's instructions for the evening," she replied coolly. "Don't worry, everything is proceeding according to plan." "Not my plan," Logan muttered. But there was little he could do but watch as his carefully crafted vision was systematically altered. The elegant signage bearing the name Legacy had been replaced overnight with sleek black letters spelling Shadow. The menus, the cocktail list, even the staff uniforms had been subtly transformed. Still luxurious, still high-end, but darker, more minimalist, with none of the warm, inviting touches Logan had specified. His phone buzzed constantly. Investors asking about the name change, friends confirming their attendance, his ex-wife wondering why she'd received a personal invitation when they hadn't spoken in years. Through it all, there was no sign of Alex. At 7 o'clock, the first guests began to arrive. Despite Logan's fears, the restaurant looked spectacular. The lighting was perfect, the music tasteful, the aroma from the kitchen enticing. The staff, whoever they were, moved with the practiced precision of a top-tier establishment. By 8, the place was packed. A glittering crowd of Austin and Dallas elites, political figures, celebrities, and social media influencers, all mingling in the magnificent space. Logan found himself playing the gracious host despite his unease, accepting compliments on the design and deflecting questions about the unexpected name. At 8:30, he noticed that the east section of the dining room, the area Alex had reserved for Meridian's investors, remained empty, though the tables were set and waiting. At 9, just as dinner service hit its stride, those tables began to fill. They came in small groups, men and women in their 40s, none of whom Logan recognized at first. They were well-dressed but unremarkable, taking their seats with an air of quiet anticipation. It wasn't until he spotted a woman with a distinctive limp that recognition dawned. These weren't investors or business associates. They were his former classmates from Riverdale High, specifically, those who had been witnesses to what happened that night 25 years ago. Logan's blood ran cold. As he watched, the last person to enter was Elizabeth Carter, Alex's mother, now in her 70s but still carrying herself with dignity. She was escorted to the center table by a young man who bore a striking resemblance to how Alex had looked in high school. Before Logan could process what was happening, the lights dimmed slightly and the background music faded. A spotlight illuminated the small stage area where a jazz trio had been playing. Alex Carter stepped into the light, dressed in an impeccable black suit. "Good evening, ladies and gentlemen," he began, his voice carrying clearly through the now-hushed restaurant. "Welcome to the grand opening of Shadow. I'm Alex Carter, the owner of this building and the host of tonight's special presentation." Logan started forward, but found his path immediately blocked by two large men in security uniforms. "For those of you who don't know me," Alex continued, "I grew up here in Riverdale. Like many small-town kids, I had dreams. Mine was to become an architect, to create spaces that would inspire people, that would stand as testaments to human creativity and vision." He gestured to the restaurant around them. "Spaces not unlike this one." A murmur ran through the crowd as Alex's gaze found Logan, standing rigid at the back of the room. "Unfortunately, my dream was cut short by an act of violence. An assault that left me permanently injured and unable to pursue the career I'd worked toward my entire young life. The perpetrators of that assault faced no meaningful consequences, protected by wealth and influence. One of them stands among us tonight." The crowd stirred uncomfortably as Alex raised a hand. "But this isn't just a story of past injustice. It's about the present, about the man Logan Reeves became after leaving Riverdale. And for that, I'll let others speak." With that, the lights dimmed further, and the massive screens that had been installed along the walls flickered to life. What followed was meticulously crafted and devastating. a documentary-style exposé that began with the security footage from that night in 1999, showing in unflinching detail the assault that had altered Alex's life. Logan watched in horror as his younger self, his face clearly visible, rained blows down on a teenage Alex, laughing as he did so. The footage had been enhanced, stabilized, its grainy quality improved through modern technology to leave no doubt about what had occurred. But that was just the beginning. The presentation continued with interviews, former business partners describing how Logan had cheated them, employees recounting toxic work environments and sexual harassment, suppliers detailing predatory practices, even his ex-wife speaking candidly about his infidelities and emotional manipulation. Interspersed throughout were financial records, email exchanges, and text messages revealing tax evasion schemes, bribes to health inspectors, and conversations with cronies about how to skirt labor laws. Each revelation was more damning than the last, building a comprehensive portrait of corruption that spanned Logan's entire career. Logan lunged toward the AV controls, only to find his access blocked at every turn. The security team, Alex's people, not his, firmly but discreetly prevented any disruption. His phone was suddenly flooded with texts and calls from business partners, investors, and his legal team, all watching the same presentation through a livestream someone had set up. For 45 excruciating minutes, Logan Reeves watched his carefully constructed life unravel before an audience of the very people whose approval he had spent decades cultivating. By the time the screens faded to black, the atmosphere in the restaurant had transformed from celebratory to tense and judgmental. Alex stepped back into the spotlight. "I've spent 25 years building this moment," he said quietly. "Not out of hatred, though God knows I had reason enough for that. I did it because some debts can't be paid with money, and some injuries can't be healed with time alone." He turned to face Logan directly. "You once told me to remember my place. Tonight I'm returning the favor. This restaurant, this building that bears the name of the architect whose work inspired me, will stand as a monument to the consequences of unchecked privilege. Shadow will thrive, but you won't own a single piece of it. The profits will fund scholarships for aspiring architects from disadvantaged backgrounds." Logan finally broke through the security line, storming toward the stage. "You think this changes anything?" he shouted, his face contorted with rage. "I'll sue you into oblivion. I'll destroy you all over again." Alex didn't flinch. "The evidence has already been sent to the IRS, the Department of Labor, and the Texas Attorney General's office. The statute of limitations hasn't expired on most of it." He smiled faintly. "As for lawsuits, feel free. Discovery would be fascinating." The room had gone completely silent, hundreds of witnesses watching as Logan's fury collided with Alex's implacable calm. "Why now?" Logan demanded, his voice cracking slightly. "Why wait 25 years? Because revenge is easy," Alex replied. "Justice is patient." He gestured to the restaurant around them. "I wanted you to build something you were proud of, something that represented everything you believe about yourself. Then I wanted to show you, and everyone else, the rot beneath the foundation." With that, Alex stepped away from the microphone and walked toward his mother's table, leaving Logan standing alone in the spotlight, exposed and diminished before the very crowd he'd hoped to impress. One by one, guests began to leave, avoiding eye contact with their host as they hurried toward the exits. Social media was already exploding with clips from the presentation, hashtags trending, reputations unraveling in real time. Logan's phone continued to buzz with increasingly frantic messages from his lawyers, his business partners, his remaining restaurants. By midnight, Shadow was empty except for Logan, slumped at the bar, and Alex, who stood at the entrance preparing to leave. "You've made your point," Logan said bitterly. "You've had your revenge. Are you satisfied now?" Alex paused, considering the question. "Satisfaction was never the goal," he said finally. 25 years ago, you taught me that some people can do terrible things and walk away unscathed. Tonight, I taught you that sometimes justice just takes a little longer." As Alex turned to go, Logan called after him, desperation edging his voice. "So that's it? You destroy my life and just walk away?" Alex looked back one last time. I didn't destroy your life, Logan. You laid the foundation for this moment 25 years ago, and you've been adding to the structure ever since. I just turned on the lights so everyone could see what you built. With that, he walked out into the night, leaving Logan alone in the shadow of his crumbling empire. Part 4. 1 month after the catastrophic opening of Shadow, Logan Reeves sat alone in his Austin penthouse, surrounded by the wreckage of his former life. The floor-to-ceiling windows that had once framed an impressive view of the city skyline now seemed to mock him, offering a panorama of a world that had swiftly turned its back on him. The morning's edition of the Austin American-Statesman lay on the coffee table, its business section featuring yet another article about his downfall. Reeves' restaurant group files for bankruptcy amid continuing investigations. It was just the latest in a relentless series of blows that had begun that night in Riverdale. Within 48 hours of the Shadow opening, reservations at his other restaurants had plummeted. By the end of the week, 3 major investors had pulled out. Within 2 weeks, the IRS had launched a full audit of his businesses. The Texas Workforce Commission had opened an investigation into labor violations, and the state attorney general had announced a probe into allegations of bribery and corruption. His ex-wife had given a tell-all interview to a national magazine. Former employees emerged with additional accusations. Even his oldest friends, people he'd known since college, stopped taking his calls, unwilling to have their own reputations tainted by association. Logan lifted a half-empty tumbler of bourbon, studying the amber liquid as though it might contain some answer to how his life had imploded so completely. The drink, like the bottle it came from and the crystal it filled, was one of the few luxuries that remained. Most of his assets were frozen, his accounts under scrutiny, his properties encumbered by legal claims. His phone rang, displaying his lawyer's number. Logan let it go to voicemail, unable to bear another update on the criminal charges that seemed increasingly likely. Instead, he unlocked the device and found himself once again watching clips from that night, masochistically revisiting the moment his carefully constructed facade had shattered. One video in particular had gone viral, the security footage from 1999 juxtaposed with Logan's present-day rage as he threatened Alex on stage. The internet had dubbed it "Karma Comes Full Circle," and it had been viewed millions of times. Logan's own words, "I'll destroy you all over again," had become a meme, a cautionary tale, the punchline to a 25-year joke. A knock at the door startled him from his bitter reverie. Few people knew he was staying here. He'd been avoiding his own home since reporters had started camping outside. Warily, he crossed to the door and checked the peephole. What he saw made him step back in disbelief. After a moment's hesitation, he opened the door to find Alex Carter standing in the hallway, holding a small package. "May I come in?" Alex asked, his tone neutral. Logan was too stunned to refuse. He stepped aside wordlessly, watching as his nemesis entered the penthouse, taking in the space with those observant gray eyes. "Nice view," Alex commented, moving to the windows, though a bit sterile for my taste. "Too many hard edges." Logan found his voice. "What are you doing here?" "Come to gloat." Alex turned to face him. "Actually, I came to give you this." He placed the package on the coffee table. "It's the final statement on your investment in Shadow. The restaurant has been doing quite well. Your contractual share of the first month's profits." Logan stared at the package without touching it. "Is this some kind of joke?" "Not at all," Alex replied, seating himself uninvited on one of the sleek leather chairs. "Despite everything, our agreement was legally binding. You invested time, reputation, and some capital in the project. The returns are rightfully yours." "I don't want your money," Logan said through gritted teeth. "It's not charity," Alex said mildly. "It's business. And in any case, I suspect you'll need it more than I do in the coming months." The comment stung because it was true. Logan remained standing, unwilling to give Alex the satisfaction of seeing him settle into a subordinate position. "Why are you really here? The money could have been mailed." Alex regarded him thoughtfully. "Curiosity, perhaps. I wanted to see what becomes of a man like you when everything is stripped away. The wealth, the influence, the sycophants. I wondered if there might be something worthwhile underneath it all. And your verdict? Logan asked bitterly. Still undetermined, Alex replied. People can surprise you. Sometimes they even surprise themselves. He leaned forward slightly. Did you know that I visited your father in the hospital before he died? The statement caught Logan off guard. What? That's impossible. My father never mentioned. He wouldn't have, Alex nodded. I used a different name. I was working for the company handling the hospital's renovation. But I recognized him immediately, even after all those years. He was very weak by then, barely conscious most days. Logan felt a surge of protective anger. If you did anything to him, I sat with him, Alex interrupted. That's all. His nurses said he had no visitors except his lawyer. So I sat with him during my lunch breaks. Sometimes I read to him mostly the classics. The Count of Monte Cristo was a particular favorite of mine. A faint smile touched his lips at the irony. Why would you do that? Logan asked, genuinely bewildered. Because sitting there, watching this once powerful man reduced to utter dependency, I realized something important, Alex said quietly. Your father's money and influence couldn't save him in the end. And seeing him there, helpless and alone, I found I couldn't hate him anymore. It was exhausting carrying that hatred. So I let it go. Logan sank slowly onto the couch, the fight draining out of him. Yet you didn't let go of your hatred for me. That's where you're wrong, Alex said. What I felt toward you stopped being hatred a long time ago. It became something else, a commitment to justice, yes, but also a kind of responsibility. Someone needed to show you the consequences of your actions, not just for my sake, but for yours. Logan gave a harsh laugh. My savior, then? How generous. Not your savior, Alex corrected him. Just a mirror. We all need those occasionally. They sat in silence for a moment, two men connected by a twisted history, each taking the measure of the other. Finally, Logan spoke. What happens now? You've had your revenge. Justice has been served. What's the next act in this little drama you've directed? Alex stood. That's entirely up to you. Your life is your own again, albeit with some significant challenges ahead. What you build from here is your choice. He moved toward the door, then paused. One piece of advice, if you'll take it. When everything is gone, the money, the status, the power, what remains is who you truly are. Some people discover they're more than they thought. Others find they're less. I'm curious which category you'll fall into. With that, he let himself out, leaving Logan alone with the envelope of money and the weight of his uncertain future. 6 months later, on a crisp autumn morning, Elizabeth Carter sat on a bench in Riverdale's renovated town square, watching as fallen leaves spiraled across the pavement. At 74, she still volunteered 3 days a week at the hospital where she had once worked as a nurse, though her son had begged her to enjoy her retirement. Some habits are hard to break, she often told Alex, and helping people never gets old. She was waiting for him now. He had called the previous evening, saying he had news he wanted to share in person. Elizabeth checked her watch, smiling to herself. Alex had always been punctual even as a child, a trait that had served him well in business. She spotted him walking across the square, moving with that slight limp that still pained her maternal heart whenever she noticed it. Beside him was a young woman Elizabeth recognized as Rachel, his fiancée. They made a handsome couple, both reserved, thoughtful people who had found in each other a shared understanding of life's complexities. "Mom!" Alex greeted her warmly, bending to kiss her cheek. Rachel did the same, then excused herself to pick up coffee from the cafe across the square, giving mother and son a moment alone. "You're looking well," Elizabeth observed, taking in her son's relaxed posture and clear eyes. The lines of tension that had marked his face for so many years had softened in recent months. "I feel well," he admitted, sitting beside her. "Better than I have in a long time." "And this news you couldn't tell me over the phone?" Alex smiled. "It's official as of this morning. The Alex Carter Foundation has been granted its nonprofit status. We've already funded the first 5 architectural scholarships for next fall. Elizabeth squeezed his hand. Your father would have been so proud. There's more, Alex continued. The foundation is also establishing a community center here in Riverdale, a place with arts programs, mentoring, support services. We're breaking ground next month on the old Miller property. That's wonderful, sweetheart, Elizabeth said. But I sense there's something else on your mind. Alex hesitated. I received a letter yesterday from Logan Reeves. Elizabeth's expression grew serious. What did he want? To make amends in his way, Alex replied. He's pleaded guilty to several of the charges against him, reduced sentences in exchange for cooperation with the ongoing investigations. He'll serve some time, though not as much as he probably deserves. And how do you feel about that? His mother asked carefully. Alex considered the question. Oddly at peace. The letter itself was surprising. He acknowledged what he did not just to me, but to many others over the years. He didn't make excuses. He said he's been working with a prison outreach program, mentoring at-risk teens. Do you believe him? Elizabeth asked. I'm not sure, Alex admitted. People can change, but it takes more than a few months and some flowery words. Time will tell. He paused. He asked if he could make a donation to the foundation when he's released. I haven't decided how to respond. Elizabeth was quiet for a moment, watching as Rachel started back toward them, carefully balancing 3 coffee cups. When you were recovering in the hospital after the attack, do you remember what you said to me? Alex shook his head. Not really. I was on a lot of medication. You told me you were going to make sure Logan Reeves never forgot your name, Elizabeth said softly. At the time, I worried about what that might mean, that you'd carry that anger forever, that it would consume you. She patted his hand. I needn't have worried. You made him remember you, all right, but you did it by building something meaningful rather than destroying yourself in the process. Rachel joined them, distributing the coffees and sitting on Alex's other side. Did you tell her about the foundation? She asked. And Logan's letter, Alex confirmed. Rachel nodded. I still think you should consider his offer not for his sake, but because it would be poetic justice. Using his money to help kids like you achieve the dreams he once tried to take away. Maybe, Alex said. I'll think about it. They sat together in companionable silence, watching as the town square filled with people going about their day. Across the way, Shadow was preparing for lunch service, its sleek sign catching the autumn sunlight. The restaurant had become one of the most successful in the region, its reputation built not on celebrity or exclusivity, but on the quality of its food and the integrity of its business practices. Will you ever tell me exactly how you managed to gather all that evidence against Logan? Elizabeth asked suddenly. Some of those recordings went back years. Alex smiled enigmatically. Let's just say I had help from people who had their own reasons to see justice done. Everyone who appeared in that presentation had been hurt by Logan in some way. They were just waiting for someone to give them a voice. And that voice was yours, Rachel observed. Alex shook his head. Not mine alone. We all played a part in the story. Logan, his father, the town that looked the other way, the system that favored wealth over justice. Even I wasn't entirely innocent in the end. What do you mean? His mother asked. There's a fine line between justice and vengeance, Alex said thoughtfully. I told myself for years that I was on the right side of that line, that everything I did was about accountability rather than revenge. But the truth is more complicated. Part of me wanted Logan to suffer as I had suffered. I wanted him to lose something precious, as I had lost something precious. And now? Rachel asked. Alex considered the question, looking toward the old Caldwell building with its elegant architecture and the new purpose he had given it. Now I understand that true justice isn't about making others suffer. It's about creating something better from what remains after the suffering ends. He reached for his mother's hand on one side and Rachel's on the other, holding them both as the autumn sun warmed their faces. Logan Reeves took away the future I had planned. But in doing so, he set me on the path to a different future, one I might not have chosen, but one that's mine nonetheless. In a strange way, I've made peace with that. So the story has a happy ending after all, Elizabeth said with a small smile. Not an ending, Alex corrected her gently. Just a new chapter. The shadows of the past don't disappear completely. They just grow longer or shorter depending on where we stand in relation to the light. As if to emphasize his point, a cloud passed briefly over the sun, sending shadows dancing across the town square before the light returned, stronger than before. In a minimum security prison facility 300 miles away, Logan Reeves sat alone in the facility's small library, a notebook open before him. He was halfway through a 12-month sentence that had been reduced from a potential 5 years in exchange for his testimony against several business associates and corrupt officials. The man who had once commanded an empire now shared a dormitory with 11 other inmates and worked in the prison kitchen 4 days a week. His designer clothes had been replaced by standard-issue khakis, his gourmet meals by institutional food, his king-sized bed by a narrow cot. Yet strangely, in the sparse surroundings and regulated routine, Logan had found a kind of clarity that had eluded him throughout his privileged life. Without wealth to shield him, without power to wield, he was forced to confront himself as he truly was, and what he discovered both humbled and surprised him. He wrote in his notebook daily, sometimes letters that would never be sent, sometimes reflections on his past, sometimes plans for a future that looked radically different from the one he had envisioned a year ago. Today, he was drafting yet another letter to Alex Carter, though he had received no response to his first. This one was different, not an apology or an explanation, but a proposal. Logan had been working with several other inmates on a program to teach culinary skills to young offenders, giving them a potential career path upon release. He wanted to expand the program, to create opportunities for rehabilitation through meaningful work. It was a small thing, perhaps even a futile one, but it felt more real than anything Logan had built before. For the first time in his life, he was creating something that wasn't about himself, his ego, his status, his wealth. It was about making amends in the only way he knew how, by using the skills he had to offer others a second chance, just as he hoped for one himself. He didn't know if Alex would read his letter, much less support his idea. But in a way, that uncertainty was fitting. Logan was learning to build on a foundation of humility rather than arrogance, of contribution rather than extraction. As he wrote, Logan reflected on the strange journey that had brought him here, from the golden boy of Riverdale to the disgraced businessman to, perhaps, something else entirely. The final chapter of his story had yet to be written. Outside the library window, autumn was fading into winter, the trees standing bare against the gray sky. But even in that starkness, there was a quiet promise of renewal. Spring would come again. New growth would emerge. And with it, perhaps, a chance to begin anew. Not with the slate wiped clean, but with the lessons of the past engraved deeply enough to guide a different future. Logan closed his notebook and looked out at the fading light. In the reflection of the window, he caught a glimpse of his own face. Older now, humbled, but perhaps, for the first time, truly seeing. Epilogue, 3 years later. The ceremony was small but significant, the dedication of the new Carter Community Center in downtown Riverdale. A modest crowd had gathered on the sunny spring morning, including local officials, community members, and the first recipients of the Alex Carter Architectural Scholarship, now in their final year of studies. Alex stood at the podium, still somewhat uncomfortable with public speaking despite his business success. Beside him was his wife Rachel, pregnant with their first child. In the front row sat Elizabeth Carter, beaming with pride. Architecture isn't just about buildings, Alex was saying. It's about creating spaces where people can thrive, where communities can grow, where the future can take shape. This center isn't just a structure of concrete and steel. It's a commitment to the idea that everyone deserves a chance to build something meaningful. As he spoke, Alex noticed a late arrival at the back of the crowd. A man in a simple suit, thinner and grayer than when Alex had last seen him, but unmistakable nonetheless. Logan Reeves stood quietly, making no effort to draw attention to himself, his expression thoughtful as he listened to Alex's words. Their eyes met briefly across the gathering, and in that moment passed a complex understanding. Not friendship, not forgiveness exactly, but a mutual recognition of the long journey that had brought them both to this place. After the ceremony, as the crowd dispersed for the reception, Logan approached cautiously. "Congratulations," he said simply. "It's an impressive achievement." "Thank you for coming," Alex replied, his tone neutral but not cold. "And for your contribution to the culinary arts program." Logan nodded. "It's the least I could do. The program has been surprisingly successful in the correctional system. We've had 17 graduates find restaurant jobs so far." They stood in slightly awkward silence for a moment. Two men whose lives had been intertwined by violence and vengeance, now standing on common ground neither could have imagined 28 years earlier. "I never properly thanked you," Logan said finally. Alex's eyebrows rose. "Thanked me? For destroying your restaurants? For sending you to prison? For showing me who I really was?" Logan clarified. "It wasn't pretty, but it was true. Sometimes we need to lose everything to understand what matters." Alex studied him, looking for signs of the old Logan, the arrogance, the entitlement, the casual cruelty. Instead, he saw something different. A man who carried his failures openly, who had learned to live without armor. "What will you do now?" Alex asked. "I heard you sold the remaining restaurant properties." "Something smaller," Logan replied. "More honest. I'm opening a cafe in Houston next month. Nothing fancy, just good food at fair prices, staffed by graduates from our culinary program." He smiled faintly. "No investors, no shortcuts, no empire building. Just trying to create something that adds value rather than extracts it." Before Alex could respond, Elizabeth approached, her gaze curious as she took in Logan's presence. "Mrs. Carter," Logan acknowledged her, his voice dropping slightly. "I don't know if you remember me." "I remember you," Elizabeth interrupted, her tone even. "Both the boy you were and the man you became afterward." She studied him for a moment. "And now I'm trying to become someone else entirely," Logan admitted. "Someone better, I hope." Elizabeth nodded, seemingly satisfied with his answer. "The past has a long shadow," she said, echoing words her son had spoken years earlier. "But we choose whether to live in that shadow or step into the light." She glanced at Alex, then back to Logan. "It seems both of you have made your choice." With that, she excused herself to greet other guests, leaving the two men alone once more. "I should go," Logan said. "I just wanted to see this place to understand what you've built. It's remarkable." "It's a beginning," Alex replied. "Just like your cafe." After a moment's hesitation, he added, "Let me know when it opens. Rachel and I might stop by when we're in Houston." Logan looked surprised, then nodded. "I'd like that." As Logan turned to leave, Alex called after him. "Logan." The other man paused, looking back. "The shadow doesn't last forever," Alex said quietly. "Not if you keep moving toward the light." Logan seemed to absorb the words, weighing them against his own experience. Then he nodded once, a gesture of acknowledgement rather than agreement, and walked away across the sunlit courtyard of the community center, a building designed to create opportunities where once there had been only obstacles. Alex watched him go, feeling the final threads of a 28-year story beginning to loosen. The debt had been paid. Justice, in its imperfect way, had been served. What remained was the future, not predetermined by the wounds of the past, but built day by day through choices that reflected the people they had become rather than those they had been. As he turned to rejoin the celebration, Alex felt Rachel's hand slip into his. "Are you okay?" she asked. He nodded, looking around at the community center with its soaring windows and welcoming spaces. So different from the buildings he had once dreamed of designing, yet somehow more meaningful. "I am," he said, and meant it. Above them, the spring sun shone brightly, casting shadows that grew shorter with each passing moment as noon approached. Within the building, new stories were already beginning. Lives intersecting, opportunities emerging, futures taking shape. The shadow of the past remained, as it always would, but it no longer defined the landscape. It was simply part of a larger picture, a contrast that made the light when it came all the more brilliant. The end.